Hey, growers of the world. Jordan River here with more Growcast. Today's episode is with Dr. Coco, the beloved Dr. Coco. This is a strong one. Yeah, this is a very good episode. We talk about autos, we talk about lighting, we talk about popping seeds, some hilarious and informative stuff in this one. Before we jump in, though, it's still early in the month. I urge you to go check out all of our bonus content, including so many episodes with Dr. Coco at patreon.com/Growcast. We have like 120 hours of member content now, much of it ad-free member podcast, much of it archived, and the great Growcast TV, which Dr. Coco has also appeared on. So that's really cool. Go and check it out, everybody. Before we jump into Coco's episode, got to shout out Photon Tech. He brings it up in this episode, so I wanted to drop it here. Use code GROWCAST at Photon Tech. You can get to their website by going to growcastpodcast.com/Photon and use code GROWCAST for 10% off your powerful, efficient bar-style lights. They're amazing. Coco's going to talk about them, but make sure to use code GROWCAST and send us your snapshots if you're in the USA to be entered to win free seeds. All right, everybody, thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to Growcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Before we get started, I urge you to spread the show, share with a grower, tell someone about Growcast. I do appreciate it. Make sure you're subscribed, catch every episode, and give us a good rating and review if you would, please. Thank you, all you growers. Hope we can help. I know we have in the past, especially with guests like today's guest, show favorite, Dr. Coco. What up, Dr. Coco?
Hey, Jordan. Great to be back with you.
Yeah, man. Here we are again, once again. Truly some of the greatest Growcast content between me and Coco. You know, educating growers, riffing, making fun of each other a little bit. I love it, man. Ribbing each other, Coco. You know the fans love it.
All in good love, Jordan.
Exactly. That's what you do with your closest gromies. And there's no ribbon going on at the Spring Autoflower Challenge over at Coco for Cannabis. I have dropped the ball on my Coco for... I just realized, because like I said, I had trouble with that auto that I was growing, only my second auto. And it flowered so early. I thought I'd stressed it by topping it. You said that's not really a thing. Whatever happened, it flowered very early, and then I didn't update anybody. So I'm here to apologize, Dr. Coco.
Hold on. You can stress plants by topping them if they're not growing well, if they're already sort of struggling. Topping is a stressful thing. Yeah, normally it's just not so stressful that you can't do it, or it won't sort of induce flowering necessarily.
Interesting. It could have been a coincidence. There were other parameters. I'm not going to go into the water issues again, but there were other parameters that were off. But,
yeah.
But I should have updated. I love updating. I'm not scared to admit my mistakes. People in the Slack chat know I actually love posting my mistakes. But I forgot to update, so I apologize, Coco.
Yeah, it humanizes everybody. I mean, everybody makes mistakes, and it's nice to see growing idols such as yourself, stumble every once in a while. That helps everybody else.
You can aim a little higher. I appreciate if you listen, or I'm your growing idol. And I've grown some okay cannabis in the past, but you can aim a little higher. That's all.
You are absolutely.
I'm a broadcaster.
A lot of our audiences here, growing idol. I'm sure they look up to you, Jordan. So when they see you make mistakes or whatever, that makes them feel better about their own mistakes.
The same goes for you. All the eggheads are like, Dr. Coco. Where's Dr. Coco? Where's the data? Show me the Dr. Coco data, man. But speaking of Coco and all of his data, this Spring Autoflower Challenge, this is the next one. Dude, they spring up on us, pardon the pun, so quickly.
They oh my God, it's so hard for me to keep up with them. I know we got to
right.
We like to keep the signups open for people to join late to the current challenge. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh crap, it's like we're about to start the next one. We got to get everything sort of ready for that.
I might just jump into this next one.
We've been working on getting that ready to go. The Spring Autoflower Challenge always starts on 4/20.
Oh, that's right.
On April 20th. And that's only like a month from now at this point, which is like, holy crap. So everybody come on over to cocoforcannabis.com/challenge and sign up for the Spring Autoflower Challenge. We drop seeds on 4/20, April 20th. You don't even have to grow autos. You can grow photos if you want to.
Why not?
But it is the challenge that we sort of all attempt to grow autos if we're interested in that. This year we're doing the theme around space. So it's a space theme, which basically means the groups are going to be organized into different size grows.
Oh,
So there will be a group for the smallest grows 6 feet and under, the group for like 6 to 8.5 feet, like basically the 3 by 3 tents, or sorry, the 4 by 2 tents.
so like total area. Oh, that's really cool, man.
Yeah, total area. And then a group for like, 8 to 12 square feet for the 3 by 3 tents and other sort of miscellaneous shapes that are about that large.
Nice, man.
A group for that, for the 4 by 4s and then for the 5 by 5s. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how different people sort of are organized like that. So you can grow whatever plants you want. It's really fun to do autos because having a bunch of different people all drop autos on the same day, like you were saying, do some of them flower a lot sooner? Do the plants that were heavily trained seem to flower sooner? It's such a large sample size that you can actually start like seeing those kinds of patterns.
I would like to know what you've learned from that large sample size. Like, for instance, do you notice anything about autos in their, I don't know, are they less uniform than photoperiods? Have you noticed?
Yes, they're less uniform. They don't flower in together as much as photos do.
Wow.
And that's clear. I mean, that's easy to understand why, because they're relying on an internal clock rather than an external cue. And so the external cue is the same for all the plants and they get sort of triggered at the same time. The internal clock is going to be, a little bit different individual per individual.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, we noticed that. We notice differences in flowering the same exact strains doing these challenges. There definitely, in my observation, seems to be a relationship between how fully lit you are and how long the flowering period lasts. People that are underlit flower, or it takes longer for them to flower.
Oh, sure. That kind of makes sense. I suppose if there's some sort of, like you said, internal parameter that must be met, it might slow down the entire process.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's for photos or autos, really. The length of time it takes the plants to finish, it's almost like they need a certain photon count, right? And it just might take them longer to get that photon count if you're providing fewer photons.
Is there some sort of theoretical ceiling to that? Like, what if we find some sort of, there are photosynthesizing microbes combined with CO2, combined with, could we get to a point where we're like, I know we're going to actually talk about in this episode people overpowering light specifically for CO2 supplementation. But do you know what I mean? Like, is there a point where we could take this to the nth degree so far that we're lighting these things with like a nuclear...
we're pushing at the biological limits of photosynthesis.
And it's a 7-week strain now or a 6-week strain? Is that a possibility?
Yeah. I think there are breeders that are pushing in that direction. You are going to run into energy limits. I mean, the laws of thermodynamics and the conservation of matter and energy and things like this.
Fucking nuclear reactor in your grow, man.
Well, yeah, there's only so much efficiency gains that you can do.
I see.
It's not just a matter of sort of increasing input and that's leading to an increasing output. What you're trying to do is keep a sort of similar input and increase the output, right?
Right.
Or it changed the relationship between input and output. I mean, you need to increase the efficiency essentially. And oftentimes when you first start making efficiency gains, it's really easy and you can get a lot pretty quickly, but you run out of that low-hanging fruit pretty quick. So yeah, they're looking at literally inside, photosynthesis and thinking about how to improve those processes. But in terms of where we're at now, yeah, we sort of understand what the limiting factor is and how we can maximize those things. To sort of think about that in terms of PPFD and carbon dioxide and all of that. I mean, the studies done by Chandra et al. Show that we can get really good efficiency, like the best photosynthetic efficiency up with supplemental carbon dioxide and pretty high PPFD values. There is a limit there. You're not just going to be able to continue to increase the PPFD indefinitely. And then there's the day length limit. Photoperiods can only receive light for about 12 hours each day. And so that times the PPFD limit of photosynthesis is going to set sort of the maximum for what the plant is able to absorb in terms of energy. And at that point, you got to think about, well, how effectively are we using that energy? One of the really interesting things that's happened in sort of the history of crops over the last half century or more has been dwarfism. All the modern varieties of rice and wheat are dwarf varieties. They're these green revolution varieties that were grown to be small plants with large seeds because we harvest the seeds and we don't harvest the rest of the plant. So back in the 60s and 70s, that was the big push in plant breeding, was to make plants be able to produce the same size seeds and the same number of seeds, but on a much smaller plant, because you don't need all the rest of that plant architecture. We're just throwing that stuff away. What we really want is the seeds. Those led to the green revolution varieties that, although they created massive social problems for farmers around the world, led to a big increase in production. And that's basically doing that. It's saying, the plant, we can only get this much energy to the plant. Let's make sure the plant is putting all of that, or as much of that as possible, into the parts that we care about. And I do think that there's some more sort of breeding work, but also plant training work in terms of, if really maximizing your returns is your goal. A lot of that will be growing dwarf plants. I mean, that's why some people do SOG, Sea of Greens, a ton of little tiny plants. That's basically following the same green revolution model of dwarf wheat or dwarf rice.
Is there any real definitive downside to that type of selecting, other than any type of preference selecting like that reduces the gene pool, obviously? Is there a moral to that story of how we all switched crops to dwarfism?
Oh man, moral of the green revolution. It's kind of off topic of this. So what happened with that in particular, the 3-second version, it was a social disaster. It led to hundreds of thousands of farmers committing suicide in India.
Whoa.
Yeah, the farmers that were early adopters of green revolution varieties did better than their neighbors. So one common pattern was that they started buying out their neighbors, and it led to land concentration. Another pattern that happened was that the dwarf varieties really are all these modern varieties that depend on heavy loads of nitrogen in order to support those yields. Companies would market the seeds together with fertilizer packages on credit to farmers. And when the crop failed, they would lose their land because they were indebted to the companies. If it worked well, they would become sort of very successful. But that process of sort of indebting farmers on a risky bet and having it pay off for some and not for others has led to massive land concentration, rural poverty, migration from rural areas into cities. It's been one of the major demographic drivers of the last 50 years. So It's a huge thing, but a little bit off.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's super fascinating, the socioeconomic impact. I was talking about the gene pool as related to cannabis, but that shit interests me.
Yeah, that's the stuff. And to be honest, that's what those are the kinds of things that I look at in my academic career.
That is fascinating, Coco. I didn't know that, man. So you're not a boring teacher? That's cool. I
try not to be a boring teacher.
Because you're good on the show. I didn't think you could do both. I thought you would go and teach something, super, super boring. But yeah, man.
I'm a lecturer essentially by trade, right? That's what I do.
I'm just poking fun.
I teach large groups of students often. I've taught classes with over 900 students, and it's comfortable for me to just kind of talk. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that is fascinating stuff, though. And Mary Beth has, for instance, and multiple people on the show have brought up that kind of enslavement cycle that was. And I didn't know it was linked together with the seeds. Very interesting stuff, man.
Yeah, that's all the sort of history of the Green Revolution. Numerous books have been written, articles published, et cetera, about all of this. So if anybody's interested in sort of all of that. But that's been the history of modern agriculture. And, knowing that history and sort of understanding how other crops have been developed commercially, I think is an interesting window, because there is certainly something to learn there about what's going to happen with cannabis as 100%. It becomes a more mainstream commercial crop.
100%. We have to try and learn from the lessons of history, because history just is on repeat. History repeats itself.
Yeah. And the history of farming has been almost always that it starts off with a bunch of small independent farmers that manage their own livelihoods and lead lives of dignity, and come back sort of after demographic change, and there's a bunch of agricultural laborers doing that same work on that same land that are paid below minimum wage, that are often displaced from their communities of origin, and that lead lives with absolutely no dignity. That's been the sort of change that we witness in agriculture globally, in terms of who is doing the farming.
Sure.
We should be, as farmers ourselves,
we should be concerned about that.
With large scale commercial operations coming online and fighting for market share, and more powerful than us little peasants, because we are peasants in this scenario as home sort of cannabis growers. There are lessons to be learned there, and cautionary tales.
100%. And also, not to mention, you talk about the laborers working on the food production chain. The food production chain itself in that system usually becomes poisonous and exploitative of the land, and there's other.
Same
Absolutely. Thing could happen to cannabis. 100%. So you're right, man. We are. Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. That is the saying. I think, I don't know who that phrase is by, but very apropos, if you will, if I may use that word.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people think that cannabis has no history, or that it's just this totally novel and new thing. But, there are interesting relationships. And I always like to think about myself as being a peasant farmer. I think that it's just a fun thing to be.
Dr. Peasant.
There's a lot of dignity, a lot of power, and a lot of sort of self-sufficiency that comes with being a peasant farmer. We can control things for ourselves. We don't have to rely on other people to provide our medicine, for example.
That's really cool, man. That's a powerful message. I love that.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with Dr. Coco. Before that, shout out to Delta Leaf Labs. For your sex testing needs, deltaleaflabs.com. Stop wasting your time sex testing. Use code GROWCAST to get free shipping on your tests. Get the results back quickly and accurately, and be entered to win free sex tests just by using the code. Delta Leaf Labs, like I said, wasting all that space growing up to sex, wasting all that fertilizer and soil growing up these plants to sex. You can do it when they're tiny little seedlings with Delta Leaf Labs, and you get the results quickly, cheaply, and accurately. It's a game changer in my grow. Make sure not to mix up your results as I did, and throw out females. But that wasn't Delta Leaf Labs' fault. That was my fault. In fact, here's a little bit of a tip. Go back and listen to the episode with Elijah if you want to know why they asked you to take those cots. But when you're finally selected, when you get your results back and you're going to make sure that you're looking at the cots, you're making sure that the ones you took are the accurately labeled ones, that the ones you took got tested. Because that's what I did. I accidentally killed females and kept one that was untested. I saw there was 2 cots on it. So a little tip for you for your sex testing. Stop wasting that time, baby. DeltaLeafLabs.com. Use code GROWCAST. And send us snapshots of any code for the show to be entered to win free seeds. USA only. Unlimited entries. Love it. I know you do too. Let's get back to Dr. Coco right now. We have talking points. We can just keep chatting, though. I know this is strong shit. I know that the listeners are loving it. And every time we get on the phone, it's like this. But actually, why don't we bring it back around to autos? Because you're saying, you can grow whatever you want in the Autoflower challenge, but that's the challenge, is to try an auto. I was happy with my first auto. Second auto had a little bit of struggles. Right now, I got a beautiful blue Hindu going. What do you recommend as far as, I don't know, maybe you can talk to photo growers trying autos. Maybe you can talk to growers like me who had trouble training autos. Maybe some advice on that. Wherever you want to go.
First of all, I think there's some myths about autos that I'd like to try to dispel, because I think those myths lead growers to have bad experiences with autos. One of the most pernicious myths that I see is that autos should not be transplanted. That, I think, makes people, first of all, autos, like every other plant that you grow in a pot, should be transplanted, potted up. there's no conceivable reason that would be different for autos than for other, like every other potted plant. But for some reason, growers think it is, and they put it in a final container to start with. And that leads to a very slow vegetative growth. And then everybody thinks that they're sort of like slow plants, or they don't grow very big. So the first thing is to treat them sort of more like other plants in that regard. They're not sort of like, I don't know. People approach autos like they're a totally unique and different thing that you would have to do differently than
like
any
they're
other.
a magical alien.
Yeah, no, they're not really. They're just a plant.
To be fair, we treat cannabis like that, and it does have magical properties. But as far as growing
it totally does.
As far as growing
it totally has magical properties. Yeah, I don't mean to undersell the magical properties of cannabis. But to a large extent, cannabis really is like a plant. I mean, in terms of the fact that it grows like a plant.
Still needs water.
It photosynthesizes like a plant, and it's not like something else.
Exactly, yeah. Still needs water. You put water on it to grow.
Right. Its fruit's wet and its leaves sunny, and it'll be a happy little plant.
I know that. I know my plant science. What plants need water.
So yeah, the autos, they're going to have a fixed flowering period. And that's basically on a clock. And it's not a result of environmental conditions, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't pot up. I've still sort of not been able to figure out how that became such a popular story. And I think that alone, starting in large containers, starting tiny plants in large containers, it adds a couple weeks to the vegetative period. I mean, I try to do things during germination and seedling time to like save days. If you're going to start in a 5-gallon container, a little seeding or a sprout or something, that's going to add like 2 weeks to your veg time.
Right.
And you can't add time to a veg time when you're growing an auto. You got like 4 weeks period. And if you're now sort of slowing yourself down, you're going to have a smaller plant by the time it gets to flowering. So there is an incentive to do the seedling stage well with autos. And, to take good care of them and to get them growing well during that seedling stage. And that means usually starting in a party cup size container for the first 2 weeks or so. Then getting them up into, you can go to maybe a 3-gallon if the 3-gallon is going to be your final at that point.
That's what I do.
I usually step up to like a 1/2 gallon or a 1 gallon and keep them there for another week to 10 days. And then pot them up into their final container when they are like, mid 20 days old. I always count. This is the other thing that I always get a kick out of. I always count days with seedlings from the day the seed gets wet.
What?
Period. There's no excuse or reason to count from any other day. This is like...
What about when it comes above ground?
And cheating, other than trying to cheat and say your plants aren't as old as they actually are.
When the seed gets wet, you mean when I put them in the paper towels?
Yes, that's day one. The day your seed goes into paper towels is day one.
No. Okay.
No, what?
That's
Day
crazy.
one. That's the day you start, period. That's how I count. If you want to count from some other day, that's just because you don't want to count all the days.
No way, you're nuts.
You want to have a smaller number to be able to tell everybody because it makes your plants seem younger and faster and whatever.
All right. I see your point.
They're going to take a different number of days to germinate, for cotyledons to open, for the plant to break above ground. All those things don't take the same amount of time for each seed. So if you want to count in a way that you'll be able to repeat again the next time you grow, you count from the day the seeds get wet, because that's the day that you start to grow.
I like that. I see your point, and I know exactly what you mean. But even though after 48 hours in the paper towel, some have grown more than others, they usually break ground about the same time after being put in dirt. It's not like those get above ground.
But break ground is just such an arbitrary cultural element to this plant's life. The plant is already alive at that point. So if you want to count the moment that metabolism engages with no, I've lost my vocabulary. Oxygenated metabolism. What is that? Respiration. If you want to count the point that respiration and metabolism within the cell structure or whatever starts, that would be the moment that the seed is like awakened from dormancy after imbibition. But yeah, no, I really do. I give a lot of growers a lot of flack about this. This is
that's
like,
hilarious.
Cheating in the way you measure other things by like starting at an earlier point or starting at a later point. It's like, okay, there's an
Is that like a dick measurement joke there?
What's that, Jordan?
You were just lined up for like a dick measurement joke. I don't know if that was an allusion to that.
Exactly. Where do you start measuring that?
From around the balls or whatever? Like you count one lap around the balls.
Blue on our audience here.
I'll go there, Coco. Listen, you're a professor. I'm a podcaster, so I can go there. But Coco, let me ask you one thing though. What about vegetable farmers? Do they count?
But that's exactly my point, right? Yeah, we can find creative ways to measure things. But what we really want to do is take a measurement that we can repeat and that we can tell to somebody else. And so when somebody else does this, we say, okay, day 1 is the day it gets wet. And then day 25, you put them into final containers. If you're starting to count when the day breaks ground, then boy, it depends on how deep you planted that seed.
Oh, that's
true. It depends
on
how long you planted it in paper towels. One grower to the next isn't going to be the same.
That's true.
And you're not going to remember how many days it took to germinate. Why wouldn't you start on the day you started?
Those are all good points, and I can't argue those. Although I will go for an attack of character. Don't you also start your flowering days by when it shows? How do you count your flowering days when you're indoor? Do you count by flip?
We actually, I totally understand doing it either way. So in our journals, we offer the option of doing it either way. There's flip days or flower days.
Yeah, because you kind of do need
both. Flip days
both.
start on the day you flip to 12/12. Flowering days start on the days that you recognize the first signs of flowering. Usually you see a bunch of pistils popping. They're often about 6 to 10 days apart. So,
that's a good distinction. Yeah, flip and flower days.
I always have to ask. When somebody says they're in the 3rd week of flower, they're 21 days into flower, I always ask, when did you start counting days? On the day that you flip the switch or on the day that you recognize pistils?
That's a really good distinction between flip and flower days because almost every breeder, like who I've talked to who breeds for like indoor grower, you know what I mean? They usually tell you the flowering time based on flip. But if you're an autoflower, if you're outdoor, you don't know when that flip is. So you have to count from flower. That's I've never heard it distinguished.
I'm not actually sure that's true, Jordan. A lot of breeders quote the flowering days in contrast to flip days because it's a shorter time.
So we surveyed on this podcast. We surveyed a bunch of and there are definitely some, but the majority. And I'm talking about people like Mad, the great Mad Farmer, and some of these guys who have been around for a while who were very adamant about their flip days. But there were some who count by flower because, like you said, if you're an outdoor breeder,
there is no flip.
Exactly. And if you're on an autoflower,
flip is another arbitrary thing that we've developed because of indoor growing in light sealed spaces. Yeah, it is not sort of a plant biological thing.
Marker, right?
So if you're really thinking flower days, and that's why I call them flip days. If you're really thinking flower days, that's when the plant enters into its state of flowering. This is actually interesting to just point out something about nutrient schedules. If people are growing hydroponically or in cocoa, there's a week called transition week in your nutrient schedule. And that's the week that we're talking about. That's in between the flip and the flower.
Sure, good point.
And then the flowering starts the stretch. A lot of people think the stretch starts at the flip. It doesn't. That first week, the plants don't stretch much at all. They grow about what they were growing at in late veg. It's once they morphologically enter the flowering stage. So there's a transition week after you flip in a photoperiod grow. There's a transition week. And then there's about 2 weeks for most strains of stretch.
Very good point.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard growers say that the first 3 weeks after you flip is the stretch. And it's not. It's the first week isn't. The first week is the transition week. And the plant's going through a whole bunch of different things during that week. So it has a really interesting nutrient element ratio and a lower electrical conductivity in a hydroponic grow. And then it enters the stretch. And those are the early bloom nutrients on your feeding chart are supposed to be lined up with the stretch. So as long as the plants are growing vigorously, you stay on sort of those early bloom newts. And as soon as it stops growing vigorously, that's when you would transition to the mid-bloom newts.
Interesting. Yeah. Again, another very important distinction, that transition period. And I'm guilty of that. Get ready for the stretch. Technically, there is like a delay. That's a good point, man.
Yeah, there's a delay. And then some plants stretch longer than the 2 weeks. But those 2 weeks are my favorite time to be a cannabis grower. I often also hear people talking about like finding ways to reduce or minimize the stretch, but I just absolutely love it. And to get back to autos, if you have autos that are growing well at that point, because they're not flipped, they're still can be on I usually run them on 20 hours of light, 4 hours of darkness. And they entered that period of early bloom because that's what it is. It's when the plant enters its morphology or flowering morphology, it has that initial burst of growth activity. You see this in a lot of plants. Like the yuccas that send up that big flowering stalk.
Right.
And like it can reach 20 feet or whatever. There's a lot of plants that as soon as they enter the reproductive phase, they go through a huge growth spurt. It happens with photos. It happens with autos. The autos, you don't control it as much. And the autos get 20 hours of light during their stretch period. And they take advantage of it. If you've got good growing plants, autos are the biggest plants I've ever grown by far. My problem with them usually is like I would have flipped photo period plants earlier, or they just stretch so damn much during those 2 weeks that you can't keep up with it. I mean, I've had autos that grew 4 inches a day.
Right. Yeah, that's what I've heard, especially in these high fertigation or constant fertigation methods. Like your method or like an aquaponics. I know they get explosive growth and stuff like that. Interesting stuff, man.
And it's just fun. It's fun to grow them there. So, that's in contrast. Now, if you had an auto that maybe you started in too big of a pot, that maybe it had a rough vegetative period, that maybe by the time it hit this stretch, it still wasn't that great of a plant. But, almost every plant, when it hits that, what we're calling the stretch, that flowering burst, it'll recover. If you really do have a runty plant, the runtiness will kind of get knocked out of the plant a little bit. It'll grow up and show signs of life during the
stretch. I wonder
stretch.
if I shouldn't have killed mine.
But it's still going to be a tinier plant. It's never going to catch up. Okay. And the other plants will be like taking off during the stretch. And the little runt will be like using that burst of energy just to sort of like get its act together. So, yeah.
Can I ask you then? Because I alluded to this earlier, and please, I am an auto noob. You auto growers out there, I know I see so many of you guys crushing it. Don't get mad at me for asking this. But like, I do know occasionally in nature with any seedling, and you usually don't get this with really nice, vigorous photoperiod genetics, but like there are runts. And you said that with autos, there is less consistency. Do you consistently or somewhat consistently see like runt autos, or is that just a grower problem?
Yeah. Well, and it's not just genetics either. I think a lot of it is environmental.
Okay.
A lot of it is early root damage. Oh. Most runtiness, I believe, is caused by root damage. Certainly there are some genetics involved in it, and you could have just a genetically weak plant. But a lot of the plants that develop into runts are because of either it got too dry at some point, or it got too salty at some point, or the roots got physically damaged during the transplant, or they got physically damaged by touching some other sort of issue. That it doesn't even have to be much, especially during the transferring of seeds from like paper towels into Jiffy, or paper towels into your media. That if there's, if you sort of mess the roots up a little bit, then the plant might not die. The plant might be able to recover, but it's going to sort of struggle for a while and be more runty. Totally. I think oftentimes, though, it happens to growers because of a combination of dryness and saltiness. That really only has to occur once to sort of fry the roots, and then the plant will take a while to recover from that. There are some telltale signs of that root damage, but I do think that that's usually the case. When I had a runt auto when I was growing those autos that were growing 4 inches a day, and it got buried. It literally got buried by the other plants. And I had to put another light in my grow because it was like underneath the other plants at that point. Otherwise it would have just died because it had gotten completely covered. because it wasn't keeping up.
Man, yeah, you totally nailed it. I think that's probably what happened to me. It could have been a combination of those things. And when you have an auto, you're on a clock. One of the beautiful things about
recover.
Yeah, one of the beautiful things about a photo period is the ability to hold it into veg, to fix the soil that got too salty, to have plenty of time to flush that out,
to make sure that it's growing well before you flip it.
Take care of an infestation.
All the training that you had intended to do.
Exactly. So true. So I almost feel like it's tough because I see beginners starting autos and having a great time, but also they're tough in certain ways. So it's just different.
I don't think they're easier during the flowering period, but the flowering period is easier. They're harder during the vegetation period. And the vegetation period is sort of easier to begin with. So I think for beginners, it's better if you can have a light sealed space. The only issue with growing photos is you need to have a light sealed space.
Right.
And so that can be an issue for some people that are trying to set up a grow in their closet or their bathroom or whatever, and they don't have a tent and it's not going to be light sealed. Autos are the way to go there because you don't have to light seal it.
Right.
But if you have a light sealed space, I recommend growers start with photos because you're on a clock with autos. And as a new grower, if you have any kind of issues during the seedling or the early vegetative period, you can screw up your whole plant. I mean, and you're never going to have time to recover from that. With photos, you can just keep sort of babying your plants until they get back from their assault or their injuries that they've suffered. And then you can go on to have a wonderfully successful harvest. It just might take you an extra week or two.
100%.
You don't have an extra week or two with autos. You'll just have a small harvest. So you're right.
Yeah. Harder in some ways, easier in other ways, for sure. This has been a wonderful exploration. Let's make sure we get to a few different things here. I know you're still light testing. There's a couple panels that I want you, a couple fixtures I want you to test. I know you got your hands on. We are loving the Photon Tech. You partnered us up with them. So happy to be working with Photon Tech, and my 600 is.
Oh, they're great fixtures, aren't they, man?
They're powerful.
It was the hardest one for me to give away after I tested it because I was just like, I mean, really, I'm gonna just give this away? I want it. I don't want to keep it for myself. This is one of the coolest things I've ever owned, and now I have to give it away to somebody.
That's hilarious, dude. Let me tell you really quick. It was so powerful that usually I crack my tent open for Growcast TV. To get the light shining from both sides so I can point the camera in and show my grow for the members weekly Growcast TV. You guys know it.
Yeah.
Since replacing it with a Photon Tech, I can't have it open. It washes out the whole, because the tent is glowing so much, it washes out the whole shot.
That's
so
funny.
I have to tape
but
it mostly closed.
You could probably just dim it down.
I dim it, and I can't forget, but I have to both dim it and tape down the flap a certain way. That's how fucking powerful.
Oh, wow.
I know that's very unscientific. You're testing the actual PPFD. Here I am going, it ruins my shot, but goddamn, what I'm saying is noticeably, it's just very, very powerful. It's the most powerful light of it.
More light, yeah.
And
no, you got a lot of light.
I just got the 600.
Photon Tech X600 watt in the 4x4, which is really more than growers even need in a 4x4. The 465 that they have is sort of perfect for 4x4 application, but you can go 600. And you really can run it dim in there, probably, especially during the vegetative period.
I got 75% on veg, and the plants are absolutely loving it. But you tested what? You tested what, the 1,000 watt? Tell us about how the test performed.
I have not yet tested the 1,000 watt. We've just been, that's coming out right now, and that is the CO2 1,000 watt. So that's the same frame that you have in the X600 watt. Except instead of the 6 bars, there are 10 bars.
Geez, I feel like it's already pretty packed tight. That's going to be a lot of a count, man.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of light. It's a really cool fixture. So, in CO2 grows with supplemental PPFD, usually you run in a sealed space because you're supplementing the CO2. And in order to get the carbon dioxide PPFD up high enough, you need to seal off the space, which means that you need to manage everything with manage the climate. We've talked about that in this show before. So you need air conditioning and dehumidification and all of that. And most growers that run in those spaces do not use LED lights because the LED lights run too hot. And you're probably thinking, well, HPS lights run a lot hotter. No, they run air-cooled hoods in a sealed space with HPS.
Oh, that makes perfect sense because there's no air exchange. The hoods are sealed.
There's no air exchange with the grow room. There's just sucking the heat out of the air-cooled hoods.
That does make sense. You're right.
And those air-cooled hoods have been able to deliver sort of a lower BTU into the sealed grow space than an LED would have. But yeah, Photon Tech's got a LED that they feel has the sort of the efficiency.
My God.
And the low heat output. I don't know if you've noticed sort of how cool those fixtures run.
It's almost a problem for me. I highly recommend for anybody with heat troubles because it was getting so cold. My output fan is on 1.
Yeah, right. So you're going to have to get a heater or something, right? So that's the issue. So they've got their LED bars to be putting off sort of such a little amount of heat that they're like, we can go into sealed rooms without adding too many BTU. And that was one of the sort of design concepts behind this. That's one of the reasons that LED bars haven't been in those kinds of grows in the past, because they would have put too much heat into the room.
I never knew
and
that.
led to too much sort of cooling costs.
That's so fascinating, man. I never knew that. Let me ask you this since we're on the subject just really quick. Just really quick before I forget, also use code GROWCAST.
Okay, yeah.
Use code GROWCAST, of course, listeners. Send us your snapshot, be entered to win free seeds. You know about that contest. But we're on the subject of CO2. I am running my fans on literally on the minimum setting. Does the room need to be sealed? What if I supplemented CO2 in a room that wasn't technically sealed but had little? Let's say I turn off my exhaust fan. Would that be enough? Would having it on 1 with the CO2 effect, or do you still say it's not worthwhile?
I mean, it depends on how much CO2 you're putting in there and what the air exchange rate is.
I just don't know what that looks
like. Room. Even on low, there's just not a lot of cubic feet footage in a 4x4 tent. And so most of the exhaust fans that we run are capable of replacing all of the air in like 45 seconds or a minute.
Good point.
Even on low, it's going to replace all of the air maybe in 10 minutes.
Good point.
So it depends on the release rate. It depends on how much carbon dioxide you're providing. But yeah, it could have an impact. You don't necessarily need to tape off all the seams and stuff like that. Most grow tents are sealed up reasonably well just for light. If you don't have a fan sort of pulling the air out of it, that you'll be able to maintain a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in there.
Yeah.
And when you're grow, you're going to push in at a pretty high PPFD. If you notice in flowering that the plants start to look light stressed, that's one thing that you could do to potentially help them out with that if you really don't have to be running your exhaust very much.
That's a fucking powerful light.
This is exactly the sort of line of whole thinking and product development that led to this, Photon Tech XT1000 CO2 fixture, was saying, oh crap, they're not putting out very much heat at all. We think we could put this in a sealed room and, have even maybe better success than with the air vented hoods, because the HPS fixtures in an air cooled hood still put out BTUs into that room.
That's exactly right. We just had a whole episode on this idea of, balancing heat and efficiency. And so many growers are in a nice temperate environment like Humboldt County, and they don't have to worry about things like supplementing heat. And it's like a totally different game. Or for instance, like you said, sealing off for CO2, totally different game. Really fascinating stuff, though. I never put it together why they would use air-cooled HIDs in that scenario, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it really does and it's one of the last sort of bastions of the HPS. I'm really curious to see how those growers respond to the Photon Tech CO2 fixture. It's really the first fixture out there that's been specifically designed and marketed for that application. That there hasn't been something sort of gone after. An LED that goes after sealed rooms is is pretty cool. I'm curious to see how they're going to do with it.
I just keep chuckling because I imagine that thing is going to be so fucking bright. It's going to be like blinding because I can.
Oh, it's absolutely going to be. That's the other side of it. They're trying to deliver 1500 ppfd to that canopy with a low heat output, really sort of astronomical. I don't know. I have not tested it, but I'm really excited to see
cool,
how
man.
it does in my test.
Well, I'm loving it.
Really well on the usable ppf efficiency for sure.
That's killer. I'm loving the regular X series, so I can't wait to hear about this tech and this new tech.
That's the other thing is it's the XT CO2 fixtures. There's not every grower can sort of handle that.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, like it doesn't make sense why
you would most growers.
Like,
if you put it in your tent, I think you'd have to run it at 25%. Like maybe at like 30 or 40% or something. Like it would just be, it's so incredibly much light.
But if they put buy at your own risk on the box, everyone's going to run out and get it because it's going to be so powerful, man. It's really
well. That's what I mean. Right. I learned that lesson with a video I did for the Mars SP 6500. I said it was too much light for you, and I think that made everybody want to get it even more. But yeah, that's one of the cool. I got some other interesting fixtures coming out. So I've got a bunch of videos sort of in my queue. I have had a fixture that I have to disassemble with a hammer. I've had a fixture. Yeah, it was fun. I had a fixture that is a totally new design for a 4x4 that they've got like 4 quantum boards and sort of spacing bars that arrange these quantum boards across your grow space, which was totally different, really interesting sort of test that I'll be coming out shortly with that one. But I got a bunch of those sort of lights. I'm actually a little bit buried in that. So I'm kind of working on videos and trying to get my test reports published for all of those. But the Photon Tech one is certainly the most sort of intriguing one on my calendar right now.
Man, we look forward to it. Really quick, I know you got a hard out, so we have a limited time here. We're always up against something at Growcast. We always got another interview back to back, or Coco's always got something going on. So I want to make sure you can update people. Some new offerings coming to Coco for cannabis. Just real quick, fill us in on those.
Yeah, so I have invited, I think, a friend of Growcast, Matthew Gates, who goes by Sync Angel and by Zenthanol.
That's right.
He's an IPM expert in Southern California. And we've been talking actually he does the live show on Sundays that I'm on. And we've been talking for about a year about him doing some IPM content for Coco for Cannabis. And that is finally coming to fruition. So we have the first articles that he submitted. We're gonna do articles for his whole plant pest series. So each pest will have its own little article and videos, and it talks about the symptoms, it talks about the treatments, it talks about the background and the history and the biology and the ecology of these insects, and sort of what beneficials to use, what sort of sprays or other things to use. And I think you have experience with Matthew Gates, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan? He came on the show and did a little IPM overview.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've really been impressed with his background and knowledge and all of that. I think it's going to be awesome sort of new resource. So we'll have for the first dozen or so articles up, I imagine, around the time this podcast drops.
Nice.
That's about our schedule right now. So hopefully they're there by the time, and I'll try to make that a goal now. I have a few days, I think, before this broadcast drops. So we are really moving on editing and loading those articles onto the website. So we're going to have a little launch date and have a bunch of articles ready to go at that point. And then he's just going to keep adding to them. He does, YouTube videos for each one of these pests, and we'll put those videos up at the top, sort of like I do on my Grow Light test report pages. Video at the top, and then a good little explanation for growers. I hope that this will become sort of a really authoritative IPM resource for home cannabis.
That's great. We could use one, man. And you do a good job of integrating your different forms of resources with different forms of media. But I will say, I've said this before on the show, I'll blow some smoke Dr. Coco's way, and I'll also recommend to anybody out there who's a cannabis content creator, it's almost way easier to find a audio podcast or a video on a subject than it is an article or, here's the big one, an infographic. Accurate educational infographics, I feel like, are maybe the hardest to come by. Dr. Coco, you dabble in those occasionally, and when you do, those are the things that I feel we kind of need more of at this point. We've done a lot of these damn audios. There's lots of audios to listen to, and people say, "Where's the infographic?" You know what I mean?
Oftentimes, if there's something you want an answer to, and you find a podcast that's an hour long, I mean, sometimes I don't want to listen to an hour. I want an answer.
Sometimes the information is way better translated through visual. And
I want to be able to scan through an article is one thing, but you're absolutely right. If you could look at a graphic or a table or something, 100%. And that way you could just find exactly the information that you need. Now, other times, you want to spend an hour and kind of, think about things you hadn't thought about before and
kill time in the garden,
how other people are doing things. But that's not always the kind of information you're trying to engage with. I totally agree with that point.
Yeah, you do a good job of that, though. You integrate your content well. And like I said, anybody out there who's a content creator or looking to get into that sort of thing, creating infographics is like, I feel that's something that I wish we were doing more of that. So just a thought.
I wrote down infographic now, Jordan, you got me thinking. I'll have to make more of them.
I throw these gems out, Coco, all the time, man. And some people
You're
just
do giving it all away for free, too. It's so sweet of you.
Listen, you don't have time to chase every good idea. And like I said, there are some people who I'm trying to help, like, Mary Jack's Garden with his DIY stuff. Like, I'm excited to see people take these ideas.
Yeah. No, I said that at one point when we were starting up Coco for Cannabis. I'm like, if I have one more good idea, we're going to go bankrupt.
Exactly. Dude, fucking go crazy. I might go insane, certifiably insane. No, Dr. Coco, Godspeed, all that you do. We really appreciate you putting so much. I mean, listen, Growcast is fun and we put on a nice show here, but you're over there doing so much and so much education. Thank you for sharing content with us all the time, and Godspeed, sir.
Absolutely, Jordan. It's always a pleasure to come on. I thank you for everything that you do as well, for curating your community as well as you do, for putting out all the content, and for providing these opportunities to come on and talk to your audience. Of course, I'd invite everybody to come on over. Remember to sign up for the Spring Autoflower Challenge. Check out cocoforcannabis.com. Check out Matthew Gates's new IPM guide on cocoforcannabis.com. The Grow Light Guide, the Grow Light Calculator, our chat room, our forum, all the fun things that we have going on. Let me tell you about one more thing, Jordan, that I almost totally forgot about. We started a strain review giveaway this month, wherein you can write a strain review for a strain that you've grown and be entered into our lottery. And this month, for strain reviews written in March, I'm giving away the Grower's Choice ROI E720, which is like a list price of $1,100. It's not a toy. It's a gigantic, really powerful grow light that I did a video of back in November. And so it is the actual unit that I tested. So you can come by Coco for Cannabis and read about the new strain review giveaway. We have a strain review editor. It asks you a bunch of questions. It's pretty easy to fill out, and you'll get a lottery number.
Oh, man, I love that. Those Grower's Choice, I've heard good things about those. So cool, man. Very, very cool. Go get it on that giveaway.
It's a cool fixture. It's an interesting fixture. It's another very sort of powerful fixture. So it might not be suitable if you're growing in a 2x2 tent. But sure. I think any grower would love to win a big light. So
get in on those giveaways, maximum giveaways. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for listening at Growcast on Instagram, at Dr. MJ Coco on Instagram. Thank you all. We'll see you next time. Everybody out there, stay healthy, stay safe, and grow smarter.
Grower love, everyone.
That's our show for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Before we wrap it up, got to give some love to Cultilux, our favorite CMH manufacturer, cultilux.com. Mention code GROWCAST10 when you speak to their sales team. Wonderful CMH fixtures, and they've got some LED stuff too, just to have those offerings. They're stepping up their game. But Cultilux is the industry-leading manufacturer of CMH bulbs, all the way up to their 1,000-watt double-ended. It's a great spectrum. It's a great way to get that heat without having to supplement it. with a CMH and HPS combo. And Cultilux really makes the best. In fact, a lot of the stuff you're buying is white label Cultilux. Cultilux.com, everybody. Mention Growcast. Growcast10. Thank you so much. Shout out to Illinois Canna Consulting, everything Rich is doing. Shout out to Jay Blank for doing the beat. Shout out to all you listeners, members. Appreciate you guys. You make all this possible. Stay tuned for some entertaining and educational grow content next time on Growcast.